Bueno, buenas tardes. Good afternoon. I would like to welcome all of you. I will speak in English because our speaker doesn't speak Spanish. So, thank you very much. Welcome to this colloque. The title of this talk is Published Landscape. I would like to thank also our speaker, Deirdre Dunne. And also, I would like to thank Dr. Hugo Olvera, who's researcher in the Institute of Renewable Energies of the UNAM, for making this possible, because he was the people or the person who invited Deirdre. Thank you very much, and I hope you will have a lot of questions, because that's the main goal of this colloque, of this talk. So I hope you enjoy it. And also, I also would like to thank Sandra Arzate, who is also the main person that have made this possible, together with Hugo Olvera. And now I would like to ask Hugo Olvera to present our speaker, please.
Hola, hola, sí se escucha, ¿verdad? ¿No? Creo que ya, ¿no? Mejor. Creo que lo voy a hacer en español. Voy a leer rápidamente la reseña de Deirdre. Creo que ya conoce ya su reseña. Y pues muchas gracias a la doctora Rosa María por hacer posible este evento aquí en el Instituto de Ingeniería. Muchas gracias por facilitarnos el tiempo, el lugar. Gracias a Sandra también por el contacto, y gracias a nuestra invitada Deirdre por venir a hablarnos un poco del proceso de publicación de revistas científicas. Deirdre lleva ya varios años, 20 años, trabajando en Elsevier, que es una de las editoriales científicas más grande. Bueno, actualmente trabaja en las revistas del área de ingeniería química, y es responsable de algunas de las revistas más importantes en el área del Elsevier, como Chemical Engineering Journal, Journal of Environmental Chemical Engineering, Journal of Hazardous Materials, Water Research. Bueno, trabaja con más de 300 editores y sociedades científicas, y pues se encarga de la diseminación del conocimiento, ciencia abierta, inclusión y diversidad. Además, se encarga de facilitar la innovación en las revistas de Elsevier, pues para proponer soluciones tanto a los editores como a los investigadores que enviamos nuestros trabajos a estas revistas. Bueno, ella es originaria de Irlanda, pero ya lleva varios años viviendo en Holanda, precisamente trabajando en Elsevier, y veo aquí que tiene una licenciatura en artes, y después de graduarse pues se dedicó al mundo de la publicación. Entonces pues, please go ahead, Deirdre. Thank you for your presentation.
Gracias, Hugo. Thank you both very much for the very warm welcome. Thank you for hosting me here, Dr. Rosa Maria. I really appreciate it. It's very nice to be here and be present today. So thank you for the translation, Hugo. You did a very good job doing that on the fly. So my name is Deirdre Dunne, and I'm a publisher at Elsevier. I've been working there now for over 20 years as a publisher, and I just wanted to tell you a little bit about publishing. I know many of you are probably very familiar with our journals, and you probably have a lot of questions, about maybe how you can publish your paper in a journal. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about different things that are happening on the publishing landscape, and tell you a little bit about the journals, tell you a little bit about what an editor expects when you submit to a journal, how you can increase your chances of getting published. And it's a lot of information from me, so please, if at any stage you have any questions, please, just raise your hand, and happy to take any questions. And if you want to ask your question in Spanish, of course, then we'll translate, so no problem. I think the idea is, from the talk, is that any questions that you might have in relation to publishing, that I can help you to answer those, because I know it's a very difficult process for many, especially when you're writing and trying to publish your first paper.
1 minute.
Sure.
Lo que mencionó Deirdre es que si tienen cualquier pregunta en cualquier etapa de la presentación la hagan. Aquí el doctor Hugo Olvera puede hacer la traducción si es que ustedes prefieren hacerla en español la pregunta, ¿ok? Gracias.
I don't see the slides anymore here on my screen. Okay. Yeah. So typically, as a publisher, I'm one of 212 publishers at Elsevier. Each of us are responsible for, it's not here, no, I can't see the slides on the screen. So each of us are responsible for a portfolio of journals. And because we have so many journals, we try to have each subject area as closely related to each other as possible. So in that sense, we always try to keep areas together, because you then have a network of individuals within one certain community. So these at the top are the journals that I personally look after as a publisher. Some of them may be familiar to you. I really look after these days primarily environmental engineering and to a certain extent chemical engineering as well. We've seen a huge growth of inflow, and you can see here on the slide, over the last couple of years, like you can see last year we received 75,000 papers. That's a lot of articles that are coming into these journals. We have over 300 editors at the moment handling those papers. So if you do the math, you can imagine how many papers each journal editor is getting. Chemical Engineering Journal is the biggest. They get 30,000 papers a year. Hazardous Materials get around 17. But pretty much most journals are in double digits. We try our best to accept as many papers as we can. Last year we published 14,000. They're primarily coming from Asia, and China is the main source of papers at the moment. And one of the reasons that I'm here today and traveling in Mexico and visiting some institutions is to really try and have a better geographic balance of publications in our journals, and ensuring that those journals are accessible and people feel that they can submit to them and get involved in our journal teams. And I'm going to come to that at a later stage. In terms of how journals are ranked, there's a couple of different methods these days. We have CiteScore, which is measured in Scopus, and that calculates 4 years of citations. And then you have the Journal Citation Report, which is the impact factor, and that's a 2-year window. And we don't yet have the impact factors for last year. They'll probably be released next week, actually. But all of the site scores for the journals have been going up. And for a couple of new journals that we have, I'll talk about those in a moment. We also have site scores, and we're getting our first impact factors. We've just been accepted to Web of Science for CEJ Advances, also Hazardous Materials Letters, and Results in Engineering is getting its first impact factor next week. So let me tell you a little bit about how we develop journals and what our strategy is. What the publisher really does is try to add value to the process. And we do that by ensuring that there's a good peer review. And the only way that we do that is by ensuring that we have editors on each of the journals. And they help to validate the research that you send them, and they try to help you improve the quality of your research by sending the papers out and obtaining helpful feedback from people in your community. We also try to minimize the number of papers we reject. So you could see on the previous slide, we rejected 60,000 papers just in my journals last year. That's really a lot of papers, and it's a lot of authors that are disappointed. So that's something as a publisher that I've been trying to address over the last few years. We see Elsevier-wide that 40% of submissions are resubmissions. For my journals, actually, it's 65%. So 65% of the rejected papers come back to Elsevier journals. And we've been trying to implement an article transfer system to try and minimize rejections and having authors spend more time resubmitting to different journals. So that's one of the things we've really been trying to work on. We've appointed over 100 scientific editors to manage rejections. About 40 of those work on my journals. So they look at all of the rejected papers when editors decide to reject a paper, and they offer a transfer to a more suitable journal. And that could be related to scope or it could be related to quality. So what we really try to do is look at the ecosystem of journals. You'll probably know from the journals that I look after, and the growth of interdisciplinary research has been really going very quickly in recent years. We look then to see how can we have more journals interacting with each other, having more overlap in scope, and ensuring that each of the scopes relate to each other, and that the journal still maintains some type of uniqueness as well. So we really look to see what's the quality expectations of particular journals to make sure that at every quality level you have a suitable title, and reduce the rejections and resubmissions, because that really only costs you as authors a lot of time. It's also very concerning for the editor workload. So 300 editors handling 75,000 papers. If all of these papers keep coming back in, so an author submits to CEJ first, then they go to hazardous materials, then they go to environmental chemical engineering, etc. And 3, 4, 5 editors could be looking at the same paper all in different stages. And that's really not a good use of their time, because they're really busy individuals. So what have we been doing? I've been trying to expand the brand families. So if you're familiar with CEJ, you'll know that it's one of the top journals in chemical and environmental engineering. So it's ranked 2nd and 4th respectively. It has an impact factor of 16.5, so it's pretty up there. It gets a lot of papers, and 30,000 is already a lot. We have over 60 editors now working on that journal trying to manage that, but they can't possibly manage all the papers they receive. So what I did 3 years ago is I launched a new journal to partner with CEJ. And one of the editors of CEJ is the editor-in-chief of this journal. So there's very close collaboration there between the two. We have a number of joint special issues, for example. So from particular conferences, we say the most novel papers go to CEJ, and the high quality, well-presented, sound papers go to CEJ Advances. So we basically look and we have 2 journals that have the same scope, but that have different quality expectations. The other difference is that this journal is open access, and that's something that has been increasingly growing in the last couple of years. Some authors need to publish in a journal that's open access. So I have a responsibility as a publisher to make sure in my area that there are journals for authors to submit to if they need or they want to publish their paper open access. The journal is free. There's no charge until we get an impact factor. And as I mentioned, we've just been accepted into Web of Science. We'll get our first impact factor next year. And in the meantime, we'll have a journal impact factor in the early citation index. The same for Journal of Membrane Science. I'm no longer responsible for this journal, but last year I opened a letters journal, which is effectively rapid communications and mini perspective reviews. And the same for the hazardous materials family. We have a very large flagship journal here, and we have a letters journal and we have an advances journal. So we basically have the same scope on each journal, And each journal has different quality types or article types, which means you can capture every type of paper and every quality of paper in the field. And there will probably actually be more partner journals coming in the next year for hazardous materials, but I can't go into that too much at the moment, so watch this space. There's going to be exciting things happening with that journal soon. And looking at the ecosystem, if you look from a top-down perspective, this is kind of how it appears. So we have CEJ, hazardous materials, environmental chemical engineering up here at the top. Kind of where you have to set the bar differently in terms of tier 1 journals, top journals, relative to the impact factors of related journals in the field. So from an author perspective, kind of anything above impact factor 8 is a top tier journal in environmental science and chemical engineering. Then you have other journals in the middle. So any papers that are high quality that are rejected here for lack of novelty can be transferred to any of these journals. Or for example here, we have case studies if the paper is a case study, which we also get a lot of, and they don't all tend to meet the novelty or the quality expectations of the higher quality journals. This journal is doing really well. It doesn't have an impact factor yet, but it does have a site score of over 8. And then at the bottom, we have here results in engineering. It's probably set to get an impact factor of around 4 or 5. The site score at the moment is 4.5. It basically is a multidisciplinary journal. It covers every area of engineering. A lot of the transfers from other journals are coming to results in engineering. So environmental chemical engineering transfer a lot of papers to results in engineering, and last year about 150 rejected papers in this journal were published in this journal. So there's a really nice relationship there. There's a lot of chemical and environmental engineers working on this. I've appointed them last year, so we have a CEJ editor as an editor-in-chief here, and we try to ensure that there's collaboration across the journals and that each of the editors understand the scope of the relevant journals, and they understand the quality expectations, and they try to help as many authors as possible to get published. So we went from about 200 published papers to 1,200 published papers last year, and we've already received about 2,000 papers in this journal this year. And I think that that's going to increase very significantly once we get our impact factor in July. This is an open access journal, and there's a relatively moderate processing charge if you submit to it, and any special issues, of which there are many, or article transfers, are fully waived at the moment. Any questions so far? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I had a question. It is a condition to be able to publish in those journals to subscribe in the open access?
Yeah, so if you want to publish open access, then these two journals are open access. These 3 journals, 4 even if you take this one into the mix, all these journals are open access, fully in gold open access. But if you want to publish open access in any subscription journal, they are in a hybrid, what you call a hybrid model. So you can publish free of charge if you want. They are subscriber journals. However, if you want to publish open access within that journal, then you can of course pay to do so. And if I don't want to subscribe to open access, there's no reason to reject my paper. No.
Okay.
No. Open access really is only a funding mandate. In Europe, for example, Horizon 2020 requires anyone who's funded to publish open access, and they say it has to be gold open access, and these are gold open access journals, which means they're fully open access. They don't support open access publications in subscription journals because they have already been paid for. The only reason really that people pay open access for these journals is because they might have some money left in their funding from their grant, and they repurpose it for that reason. Or, for example, if the paper could be of interest to the press, societal impact, economic impact. They wanted to go beyond a paywall. Like you here at the university have access to all of our journals. Some people don't, for example, in industry or in the press. So authors then may choose to make their paper open access, so it's freely available and nobody has to pay to download it and read it. That would be a small motivation. But that's really very tiny. Less than 1% of people don't have access, actually. Because most of these journals are very academic, and almost all academic institutions have access. So we can see from our downloads and analytics that it tends to be 99% subscribers that are accessing the content.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So just to go back to this slide, just to highlight here, in the middle, we don't have very many journals or any that have an impact factor. So that might be something that you've noticed. A lot of authors also want and have to publish in a journal that has an impact factor. That's a little problem that I have personally as a publisher. I have a lot of very high quality journals, and I don't have very many in the middle to publish sound and well presented papers. So what I've recently done is repurposed a journal that I am looking after, Chemical Engineering Science. This has historically always published fundamental research on fundamental areas of chemical engineering. So we revisited the scope of this journal last year, myself and the editors, really asking, is this journal current? Does it address an author's needs? Does it reflect funding requirements and funding trends? And we came to the conclusion after 71 years, we really needed to rethink what this journal did, because younger generations didn't even know about it. Older generations were very familiar with it. They published their first paper in there, and they knew what the journal represented. It has an excellent reputation and is very well known for its high quality standards in peer review. So we decided to build on this brand and expand the journal to also include applied research and ensure that there were very explicitly welcoming, growing areas like catalysis, green and sustainable science and engineering, environmental engineering. So I started approaching a lot of editors of other journals who subsequently then came on board this journal, and we reshaped everything. We gave new people on the team new roles, and we expanded the scope. Sustainability is basically at the centre of what we're trying to do, and we really want to create an impactful platform for this journal. So a lot of journals now are transferring papers here. The impact factor is 5, and while this may seem to be low, that's the nature of fundamental research. If you look at the cited half-life, which is a 10-year citation window, this journal I think is around 13, whereas Chemical Engineering Journal is only 3. So Chemical Engineering Journal, because it's applied research, those papers get cited quickly, it gets a high impact factor. This journal takes longer because it's more fundamental, and that's the reason for the impact factor. It's not because it's poor quality. So I just wanted to explain that. Please have a look. And we have a great team of almost 30 editors there now who are ready and willing to handle your papers. In case you don't know about open access and what it is, I just wanted to briefly mention the principle of open access. Effectively, all journals that have a subscription operate with green open access policies, which means that after a certain period of time, the paper can be made freely available. So as an author, you always own the content of your paper, and it's very important to be aware of that. And you can share your paper anywhere, as long as it's the Word version of the paper. So for example, in chemical and environmental engineering, it's 24-month embargo. So within the first 24 months of publication, you have to share your Word version of the paper and not the final published paper, because that could affect downloads and subscription. If you publish open access, the license means that the paper is freely available, and the article can be shared with anybody, and it's freely accessible to everybody, so to non-subscribers. So we have a mix. We have over 1,000 gold open access journals at the moment in all disciplines, but we primarily publish still subscription journals. But how do you find the right paper or journal to publish in? This is really challenging. You know, we have 3,000 journals, and we're only Elsevier. There's so many other journal publishers out there and societies that publish a lot of journals. All of them are related. All of them are overlapping. People ask me all the time, well, what's the difference between this journal and that journal? And it looks like they're doing the same. And actually, quite often they are. The difference really can potentially just be the editorial handling. Some journals may be faster than others. Some journals may have a higher impact factor than others, but they could have the same scope, and quite often they do. So the first thing to do is make a shortlist. Have a look at your references. A lot of submissions come to our journals that don't reference any paper in the journal. The conclusion the editors draw is that it's probably not the right journal to submit your paper to, or you've missed a few references in your reference list. So have a look at that, narrow your selection down. Talk to your colleagues, talk to your supervisors. They will have publishing experience. They'll be able to tell you which is a good journal, a bad journal in your field, and one to consider submitting your paper to. Have a look on the journal homepage to see if it's timely review. Most journals these days publish review time. They publish acceptance rates. They give all of the data that's associated with the journal. So you can clearly see what the acceptance rate is and how fast they are. At least all Elsevier journals do, and I think most others do as well. But you can always check on articles to see when they were submitted and when they were accepted if it's not on the homepage. Have a look at the editors to see if they fall within your area of expertise. It's really very critical to see if somebody on the team will be able to know and understand how novel your research is, how original your research is. They will have a network of people that they can ask to review your paper and give you helpful comments. And a lot of journals will ask you to select your classifications and potentially to select a section or an editor. So really have a look to see which editor you think is most suitable and try to help the journal office to assign the paper to the right person. It also shows the editors that you've done your research as well in finding the right person. Do check the aims and scope. We reject a lot of papers, and about 2/3 of the rejections are basically out of scope. It's really not because they're poor quality, not at all. A lot of papers really just don't meet the scope requirements. So just have a check to see if your paper is within the scope of the journal. Have a look at recently published papers to see if you can find some that relate to your area. Have a look at the guide for authors, and really see what the requirements are there. Check to make sure your literature review is complete. We publish very quickly. We publish a lot of papers very fast. So over 1,000 papers a month. You might have missed one or two recently published papers that could be helpful references for your paper as well. Always check to make sure that the journal is indexed in a reputable index. There's a lot of predatory journals out there. They're copying respected, well-established journals. They're copying their webpage. They are, really falsifying the whole process. And once you submit your paper, you can't get it back until the journal gives it back to you, basically. You can't submit to another journal at the same time. Once you submit to a journal, you have to wait until that journal makes a decision about your paper and gives it back to you. So that's why it's important to make sure you're not waiting 3 months or 6 months if a journal is particularly slow. You want to get your paper published. You don't want to be waiting 6 months for desk rejection, and you definitely don't want to submit to a fake journal. There are indexes out there and lists of predatory journals. If you Google them, you can really find them very easily. Have a look at the quality metrics like site score and impact factor. What we see is that a lot of authors submit directly to the journal with the highest impact factor, but maybe try to put a little bit of perspective onto your paper and where you think the quality lies within the family of journals that you've shortlisted. So don't always maybe aim for the highest impact factor, because it might not be the right journal in terms of scope. The most important thing is that people find your research. So we see a lot of papers, for example, in materials. Materials journals have much higher impact factors. Authors tend to publish there because of higher impact factors, but there could be a chemical engineering application there that's relevant to that audience, and people can't necessarily always find it if it's published in a materials journal. So you want your paper to be reproducible. You want it to be cited a lot, because that's actually what reflects on you as an author. If your paper is cited, then you will get the benefit of those citations, and it helps you establish yourself too. There could be specific guidelines within the guide for authors that you'll need to check. Some journals have word length requirements. Try not to send a paper in that's too long, that has too many tables and figures. Editors won't be very happy to receive that, because it just takes reviewers much longer to review your paper and give you feedback. So try to make sure that you have a look at the guide for authors. If there are specific requirements, follow those, and don't get rejected on a technicality, because that would be a real shame. We have a journal finder. All you have to do is pop in your title, your abstract, your area, and it'll give you some suggestions based on the keywords in your abstract and title. That could be a helpful shortlist. Now, obviously, that's only Elsevier journals. There could be other journals out there that you might want to consider too. But in any case, for our journals, we try to help. And all of the data that you would want to know about a journal, so the acceptance rate, the rejection rate, the impact factor, the speed, they're all listed there on an overview. It's very nice. It gives you some guidelines. It's not a guarantee in any way. It's really just very much a suggestion based on the keywords in your paper. So have a look at that. Maybe it might help you to narrow down your choice.
Excuse me,
Go ahead.
I had a question.
Yes.
I wonder, what did you put in the last place of your list, the journal finders?
Yes.
I thought that the first step that we had to make is to try to put our title and our abstract in a journal finder to have an idea what can be the best or the right journal to publish in.
That's correct. So it gives you some suggestions, basically, of Elsevier journals that might be suitable in terms of scope, based on the keywords. Yeah. So what are the editors looking for? They're looking for novelty, impact. The first point of call with an editor, and the first thing they'll see is your cover letter. So really try to explain how your paper is impactful and why it should be published in that journal. It's really very important. Editors get a lot of papers that don't spend too much time looking at them. So the quicker you make an impression, and you're very clear about why your paper is important, why it's good enough for that journal, the more you'll catch the editor's attention, and he or she will be willing to read through it. Really have a look to see what the competitive advantage is. Is your paper a routine study that has been done before? It could be very well presented paper. It may not be suitable for a high quality journal that's looking exclusively for novelty. So really check to see where you think you'll fit. Make sure that your literature list is good, and that it's strong, that you've referenced that journal, and that you've well presented data. If ultimately you start with your data and you build on that, don't slice it too thinly. Editors can see if you're trying to get 2 papers out of it. Try to prepare one really good paper and make sure that it's the best it can be. A lot of people go astray, for example, coming through the paper, come down to the conclusions. I think a lot of editors would probably advise to start working from the bottom back up. Make sure that you have a strong discussion, that you really sell your paper, and that you really have very consistent conclusions that align with your introduction. I think it's important to be realistic about your findings, and allow the editor and the reviewers, of course, to judge the impact of your research. So while you think it might be amazing and groundbreaking, an editor might think differently. So try to keep it balanced and let them be the judge of, the quality. So if you have new methodologies, please feel free to introduce them and make sure that you explain the results, your results very well. You may have different types of articles. So if you have a review article or feature article, have a look at the Guide for Authors and follow the guidelines that are associated with those. We get a lot of reviews that are quite simply too long, and they've been published quite a few times before. So really try to make sure that the quality is there and it'll be helpful to others in the future. If you have any new technical updates to allude to, feel free to introduce that. It makes it a lot more interesting. Good formatting is important. A lot of journals require line numbering, for example. That makes life easier for reviewers so they can indicate where their comments. Please try to help the journal with that, because reviewers, if they receive that paper, they might not just want to spend the time on it if it doesn't meet their expectations. And make sure that your graphs and your graphical abstracts are high quality and that they're very visible. If there's any issues with these and the editor sees the merit in your paper, you may be asked just before acceptance to provide higher resolution files. So, this wouldn't be a deal breaker or grounds for rejection unless editors thought that there was something unethical there, for example, with bar graphs or things like that. The title is crucial. I think the thing is to make it as strong as possible. Make sure that it's not too generic and that people really draw a summary of what your article is about from the title as much as possible. It's probably the most difficult thing to have to do, so try to ask for help on that from colleagues. It really pays off in the long run. So maybe some of you would like to get involved in journal work. These journals, they don't run on their own. We need hundreds of editors, we need thousands of reviewers, we need really good authors, and we need authors to be willing to return the favour. Papers stall in the process because we don't have enough reviewers. People get out invitations every day, probably 20 of them sometimes, asking, can you review for this journal? Can you review for that journal? What we've been trying to do and what I've been working with on my journals over the last few years are early career boards. Because one of the questions that I received giving these talks over the last 10 or 15 years is, how can I get involved? In the past, we used to invite editorial board members to join our teams based on the contribution they made in a reviewer capacity or in an author capacity. So we always look at our best reviewers. They are the people we check every year. We give them the reviewer recognition and we invite them to our board to say thank you and formalise the role they're already playing on the journal. But you don't necessarily always get an invitation when you're an early career researcher. You may not have published enough papers, you may not come up in some of our tools. We have Find Reviewer tools, for example. So we appointed early career boards to our journals. And we have an early career board member who started here on the Journal of Environmental and Chemical Engineering 2 years ago. And I have to say, as a publisher, this has been one of the most enjoyable and rewarding activities that I've been working on. It's been amazing just to engage with a whole new group of people who are so energetic and who want to get involved in journal tasks. So many Zoom calls, organising lots of webinars together. I'm here today because of an early career board member. It's so great to be able to meet so many nice people who are really engaged, rising stars in the field, want to make a contribution. And we need to make sure that journals are accessible and that journals welcome them to the family. So if any of you would like to be an early career board member, I would encourage you very sincerely to write an application, send a CV or a short letter to me, or if it's another journal, to those editors. Tell them who you are, tell them about yourself, and tell them you want to be involved in the journal in some way. Because we really do welcome that and we really encourage it, and all of the journals are benefiting very much from this help. Because it's a whole cycle. So the more people we have to help, the quicker we can publish papers and the more papers we can publish and the more high quality output we have. So let me know, okay? Any questions on this, by the way? Okay.
For
Yeah.
I want to involve a specific certification of English.
Of English?
Yeah.
No.
Specific? No. Okay.
Not at all. You know, people who don't have English as their mother tongue tend to actually write really good papers in English. So it's all about whether you feel that you are in a position to review a paper that's sent to you by an editor. That's one of the main responsibilities, is reviewing the paper that's been sent to you by the editors. So if you feel that you can contribute to a journal and that you can help authors by giving helpful feedback, then you're encouraged to join the team and do that. So the only requirements are listed here, basically, that you are 10 years post PhD and established with your own lab, and you have published before, and you have enough knowledge and expertise and credibility established at this stage of your career to be able to review a paper for a high quality journal.
Thank you.
And as I mentioned, reviewing is really very important. So the more that you can review, the better an author you will be. You will learn to write. It'll help you to be a better author. And you do get recognition for it. I know it's not always very visible. We've been trying to build a lot more reviewer recognition and making sure that you can claim your certificates for reviewing, that we highlight top reviewers, and that all of the contributions you make, you can add to your CV, you can share with people. So please have a look at our reviewer hub and see how that works. And if you receive an invitation from an editor, it would be great if you could help them, because they really do need your help. So just finally, I'm just conscious of time a little bit. You've all heard of ChatGPT, of course, and I just thought I would include this in my slides. And it's very timely because just this week, actually, we finalised our policy on AI. And I was up at 4:30 this morning doing this and putting some slides together on this for this talk, because I knew you probably would have questions, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about it. So basically, a couple of months ago, a paper published in one of our journals that had ChatGPT as a co-author on the paper. That clearly slipped through unnoticed, but it's a tool. It's not supposed to be used to write papers. It's definitely not supposed to be a co-author on a paper. And we have really been scratching our heads and going into, think mode. What do we do with this? How can we give, good guidelines? So basically, we have outlined very, very detailed policies in our publishing ethics resource kit. But you'll see here that the main issue that we have is that we need to be able to verify that the results and the paper, it's original. It cannot be written by a machine. And it's also related very much to the data and privacy laws and confidentiality. And that relates to reviewers and to authors. So for example, if you take a paper as a reviewer and you upload it into one of these tools, you sign a confidentiality agreement to review that paper. You can't share it in an open platform that may have data breaches. And you're being entrusted with a paper that has been submitted to a journal. It's very important that you treat that paper very carefully and don't use tools like this to improve its language or to verify its originality, for example. So really have a look here and make sure that you're familiar with the guidelines and what the policies are on protecting data and privacy laws, because that's really ultimately what it comes down to. So I just wanted to show you here from an author perspective. If you go to the Guide for Authors and you look at our publishing ethics, you'll see here what your duty as an author is and what the guidelines are. Basically, it's only used to improve readability and language of the work. Now, there could be benefits in the future. We've a lot of, the question is, about English language. It certainly could be a tool that helps improve language. That's always an issue. It's also a reason that a lot of papers are rejected. That's perfectly fine. as long as the paper has been written in advance of this and it's simply being used for a language check. You can't replace human oversight. These systems will never be able to accept a paper. We can't replace our editors with any of these tools. So they should be used as a tool to help, and that's really it. If any AI-related technology has been used, make sure to include this and disclose it in your potentially in your cover letter or in some way with the editor or the journal. And obviously, as I mentioned, never list a tool as an author or a co-author. So really, just have a look at the guide for authors. A lot of editors are very watchful of this because they're also unsure about how to deal with it. So if for any reason they think that you might have used one of these tools, then they may question you about that. In terms of the editors and the reviewers, yeah, as I mentioned, it really comes down to confidentiality. We can't upload confidential documents, which are your papers, into any of these tools. That's the only reason that that comes down to. We have to make sure that we respect the content of the paper, and that the peer review report is really done by a person and not a machine. So that's pretty much it. There's a lot of text here, and I'm going to make sure that that my slides are circulated around, so you have access to the links and you can see where to find all the information. But the general message is it's a tool to assist, probably mostly with language, but that's really what it comes down to. And we have been developing a lot of tools, plagiarism tools, so we look for similarities in text, but we've also been developing a lot of tools for image duplication. And every paper that comes to us is pre-screened, and we're developing all of these tools so that we can pick up on any way that a paper has not been actually written by an author and it has been generated by a tool. So this is something our tech teams are very urgently working on. I won't go through this because it's all there again. It just comes back to how you can use it to help with images in your paper and how to disclose that basically. If you want to know anything about publishing, everything is here. We have a huge resource tool full of courses, how to become a reviewer, how to write a poster for a conference, how to write a grant proposal. We've partnered with funding bodies. We've partnered with all sorts of individuals, mainly editors, who have helped us to develop training guidelines here. All of the modules that are here in the tool are certified, so you get a certificate for every module that you take. Could be helpful to you. And you get notifications about a lot of talks like I'm giving today. There's a huge online resource of previous talks on all sorts of different topics. So if there's anything you want to learn about the publishing process, I can advise you to sign up here and see if there's something there that's of interest to you. Sorry. And with that, I just wanted to leave some time for questions. I know I've kind of exceeded my time by a few minutes, but any further questions on any of part of this? Go ahead.
Excuse me, can we go to the other slide? No.
This one?
This one.
Yeah.
I would like to know if you can be more specific that what kind of funding can you offer for the research preparation of the paper?
Yeah, so the Academy basically takes you through the whole path of being a researcher from start to finish. You can see training modules in there about how to write a paper, how to become a peer reviewer, how to write a poster, how to create more social media impact for your paper. I actually added that module a few years ago. So anything that you'd like to know about is accessible within this tool. So if there's something that you're struggling with during your publication journey, you'll be able to find resources here that will help and guide. They'll give some practical information, some practical guidelines. Some of the training modules are They have voiceovers and there are multiple questions, for example, and they're certified training modules, basically. There are other talks that you can access, and there's a whole library of information there, basically, to answer and address any questions that you have about publishing, but more broadly also about grant proposals. And we've tried to include everything there that we feel is helpful to a researcher. So it's not exclusively, focusing on publishing. There are other parts that are in there as well. And it's also free.
Oh, thank you.
Any other questions? You go.
Yes, there was a question online in the YouTube channel. So, Svan Perez apparently had an issue with one of the papers he submitted in Elsevier, and he's saying that the process is very slow. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so basically some journals can be slower than others. It's very much down to the editors of the journals. They decide how much time they have to spend on journals and how quickly or slowly they may handle papers. So if this person is stuck, I would advise them to send me an email. This is my email address. Send me an email and I will send the correspondence to my colleague who looks after the journal if it's not one of mine, and they'll discuss it with their editor. Yeah.
I actually have two questions. One is, who or what determines the impact factor for a journal? And the other one is, how do you deal with plagiarism when you realize that a paper has the situation?
Two very good questions. So the impact factor is calculated on citations in the previous year over the publications in the previous 2 years. So right now we're waiting on the 2022 impact factor. That is basically taking all citations to papers published in 2021 and 2020. So that's really the very simple calculation of that. What I've noticed in recent years is the more papers you publish, the higher the impact factor will be, because of course a lot of those papers will get cited. You generate citations by publishing a lot more papers, of course, particularly if they're high quality papers. In terms of plagiarism, every paper is screened by Crossref. All publishers basically use Crossref, which is a separate tool. It's not owned by Elsevier, but all publishers use it. It generates what's called an authenticate report. And the editors can see next to the paper in Editorial Manager, they can see a report. It gives an overall similarity to other published material on the web. For example, user manuals, published literature, text on websites. It basically scans the whole web. And it will give maybe a similarity score of 25%. And the editors can see, it's like a rainbow, lots of different colors, and it will say, 1% similarity to this source, 2% similarity to this source. If there is a high similarity of any part of the paper, that's what they would hone in on and look at more closely. So they're looking basically for the single largest match, because quite often the cumulative percentage of similarity are words, different keywords, different descriptive text, like my study focuses on, and particularly methodology. There's only certain ways you can say some things that accounts for a lot of similarity. But if they see, for example, that the whole discussion has been copied and pasted from another paper, then of course the paper will get rejected. That's the course of action. If editors see anything that they perceive to be unethical, they will reject the basis on that basis, and they will communicate that in their rejection letter. And more often than not, within our system, we can add notes next to people. So we have people notes. So every author that we think has done something unethical, that will be noted, and editors can see that. So you basically get a flag. And in some instances, some people are even removed from the system, and some journals even have blacklists. Not very many, but we do try to keep an eye.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Deirdre, for such interesting presentation. Considering that some of the person here are students and maybe they are writing their first paper, do you have any other piece of advice for them? And also considering that you are right now in Latin America, do you have any idea of what are possibilities for the younger researcher that right now are not having so much budget in the projects for to open access, but also not the infrastructure to make the papers published in a really high standard journal?
Yeah, I understand. So when it comes to the geographic representation of the journals, I really would like to make sure that it's fair and it's representative. I would love to have more people in Mexico involved in the editorial teams of our journals. We really try very hard to ensure that there's a representation there. When we're looking for new editors, we try to have people from all parts of the world. We try to find people. It can be very challenging, and that's why it's really nice to be here in person and try and engage with you and encourage you very much to partake in editorial activity, and encourage you to contact editors or myself if that's something you have an ambition to do. In terms of funding, I appreciate that, and I know that it's a challenge. There's a lot of journals out there that don't actually charge from certain countries. We take part in Research for Life, which means that a lot of countries are either fully waived or discounted. There are a lot of journals that are open access, for example, where the fees are waived. So you could submit to any of my journals tomorrow that are gold open access, and they don't have a charge yet, simply because they don't have an impact factor. So we'll only start charging at that stage. So it's not a requirement to have to publish open access, and if you don't have the funding, of course you don't have to pay. There's lots of subscription journals that are also available, and they're not necessarily, all high impact journals. There's many, many journals that are in the middle that you could consider also submitting to. So when you're looking at an impact factor and you think that your paper is very sound, but it may not meet quality expectations of a particular journal, do try to identify a different alternative. And journals like Results in Engineering, they welcome all scope and well-presented papers. They are that is a sound science journal, and will be very willing to accept papers that are well-presented.
Yeah. For the students?
So, for students?
Piece of
Publishing their first paper, yeah, sorry, thank you. I would say the Researcher Academy is a really good place to start. As I mentioned, there's really a lot of training modules in there. And also just, working with your supervisor and your colleagues, asking them for advice and asking for guidance. But most importantly, I would say start reading papers. Really start reading papers. Try to read English as well. Maybe read a newspaper in English, but try to read papers. Even if you just take one paper, go to, Science Direct or whatever, download the PDF, bring it home with you when you're having a cup of tea, just read it in the evening. So I would say start reading and then start writing. Learn from others, see how they write, see what their style is, and try to use that. And if you really feel that English is a roadblock in, making your article nice grammatically, there are language editing services there that can also help.
And Mexico is one of those countries that are not requested to pay for open access?
I am not sure. So for me, I'm not really fully aware of which countries have different agreements with open access. So it's really a mixed bag. Maybe you know, Hugo? No? Okay. Well, certain systems have, access, like the Netherlands, for example. The Netherlands pays for open access publications. When you register as an author in our system, it recognizes that you're Dutch, and it says your paper will be published free of charge. That's just something we arrange for the Dutch government. So instead of subscribing, they pay for open access on a national level. In the US, the UCLA system have a publish and read deal. They do the same, but for their 10 universities. So each country is actually testing different things. It's new to us all. It's new to Elsevier. Poland does something different than Sweden. Sweden does something different than Ireland. They all do something different, and we're kind of trying to get a feel for what works. Does it help? Do authors have access to what they need access to? And most importantly, can authors get published? Because that's really the critical thing.
But do you know, for example, I know some editorials have some special discounts for third world countries.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the case for Elsevier.
Yeah, we have Research for Life. It's the same with Springer, and all of the publishers are partaking in Research for Life. There are waivers for certain countries, and there are discounts for others.
I see.
Yeah.
So
And
it
that's,
depends on...
yeah, that's available. That information will be on the Research for Life program, I think. I don't know exactly which countries have which pricing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Well, I think there's not another questions. So I would like, please, a big applause to our speaker, please. And we have a small gift and also a certificate for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all very much. It's really been nice to be here, and thank you for all the engaging questions. Oh, that's wonderful.
It's in Spanish.
I like that. I'm starting to learn some Spanish.
Okay.
I really need to. Thank you, Rosemaria. Thank you.
No,
Thank
thank
you.
Oh, so with this, we finish this nice this night talk of our guest, and so I hope you find this talk very interesting, especially for the young students actually we have a lot of PhD students, and so they have to publish one article, one paper. So this is very important for us, and we had several of our students. Are you coming from IT? And you're here making academic stage, or
yeah, I'm studying my PhD with in the institute.
Okay.
And I am in my second year. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm civil engineer.
Oh, thank you very much. So
No,
we had
thank you.
several people from IT. Thank you very much again, Deirdre. And I don't know if you have another questions, maybe. No. So.
Actually, I do. I have published my first article,
Okay.
and the biggest problem I found is when 3 reviewers said opposite comment. How could I deal with that?
Yeah, that's always tricky. Actually, it's really the role of the editor to deal with that. So when the paper comes back with 3 comments, the editor needs to look at those comments and decide how helpful they are. So they may share them with you with some guidance to potentially improve your paper and give you an idea of which elements that you may need to focus on. Even though you get 3 comments, it doesn't necessarily mean they're helpful. So if you get 1 reviewer that gives very helpful feedback and 2 others that say, oh, reject, and they don't give any reason for rejection, that's not really very helpful for you. So sometimes reviewers will make it, a reject or a major decision without giving enough information as to how you can revise your paper to make it better. And that's where the editor plays a very critical role. They need to tell you then what to do. So you either get major revision or you get minor revision. You need to pay attention to particular comments. And this is how then, this is what they'll expect from you during a revision when you resubmit and hopefully get accepted.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, and congratulations on publishing your first paper. It's a great achievement.
Thank you.
I think there's one more question. Do you have a question?
Another question.
Okay. It's okay. No problem. Well, any questions that come to mind, you know, you have my email address, and please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you all again.
Thank you.